Invisible to a narcissistic parent, unseen struggles and healing. Have you ever felt overlooked and unseen by a narcissistic parent? Has it seemed like your narcissistic parent already knew everything there was to know about you? Despite feeling invisible to this parent, have you felt guilty if you don't tend to their needs? Well, children of a narcissistic parent are often deprived of feeling visible. A narcissistic parent is not curious about the child's inner world. They're too busy propping up their own world and then using others to aid this purpose. So the child ends up feeling invisible to the parent. Despite this invisibility, the child has to forge some way of relating to this parent. In other words, the child has to find a way to be somebody to this parent, even though they feel like nobody to the parent. This involves suppressing the pain of feeling invisible and forcing oneself to fit into the narcissistic parent's world. So the parent will then use the child to boost their inflated yet fragile self-esteem. This can mean serving as a caricatured ally or enemy to the parent, but either role yields no genuine feeling of being visible to the parent. In today's video, I describe 3 ways children can feel invisible to their narcissistic parent. This happens brought in broadly by either ignoring the children or by treating them like they are someone whom they are not. Next, I discuss how children may cope by learning to exist in a narrow way. And last, I describe how one can heal by finding new relationships where it feels safe to be visible. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. In my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to the process of recovery. And this has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1, making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance, whether psychological, emotional, or even physical distance from narcissistic abusers and closeness to safe people. And pillar number 3 is living in defiance of the narcissist rules. I think it's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. I've both seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. And today's video falls under pillar number 3, living in defiance of the narcissist rules. Well, if you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or a partner, then I encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as a Scapegoat, and it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoat child or partner of a narcissistic abuser, whether it's self-limiting beliefs about yourself that you must adopt in order to survive, or why the narcissistic personality is so geared to put the people closest to them down. I hope this ebook can help you realize how none of this abuse was your fault, but rather the product of the narcissist's psychological and emotional problems. And you can find the link to the book in the description box below or by clicking here. And lastly, if you find this content helpful, then I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on Instagram or TikTok under @JReedTherapy or on Facebook under JReed Psychotherapy. And the links to all these are also in the description box below. 3 ways children feel invisible to the narcissistic parent. A narcissistic parent believes children exist to serve their needs. The parent is justified in this because they see their own needs as being most important. So the child is left feeling invisible to this parent. It's as if the children are put on a shelf in the narcissistic parent's mind, only to be taken down when it suits that parent. Otherwise, the child is expected to remain silent, at least in this psychological sense. Here are 3 ways a narcissistic parent might make a child feel invisible. First, going ignored. The narcissistic parent may regard their ambitions as supremely important. So whatever or whomever serves to facilitate these ambitions is worth that parent's time. Conditions or people who don't further the parent's ambitions are, though, worthless to them. Children often fall into this latter category. They can feel like they don't matter unless they fit into the parent's sphere of self-interest. Well, let's look at another anonymized case example to illustrate this. Sandhya's father was absorbed in his work. He prioritized whatever he thought would help him get ahead and saw fatherhood as a distant second. He would arrive home just before dinner time, then retire to his office almost immediately afterwards to just keep working. He did not involve himself in his wife nor his children's lives. Sandhya knew from a young age not to approach her father with any emotional need she might have. If she felt scared and cried out for him, he would act like he didn't hear her. Or if she was joyous and wanted to share this with him, he'd seem preoccupied with something else. As Sandhya grew older, she realized that if she asked her father about his work, then he might pay some attention to her. So she Googled the name of her father's company and read up on it. She made a list of questions in her mind to ask him when he got home that night. And to her surprise and almost delight, he seemed happy that she was interested in his work. For the first time in her life, he did not seem impatient in his dealings with her. He spoke to her for a full 30 minutes as she made sure to show enthusiasm and interest in what he was telling her. Well, in this example, Sandhya was inconsequential to her father until she reflected what was most important to him. Sandhya felt invisible unless she showed up as someone applauding him. The second way a parent can make a child feel invisible is shining a favorable light. The narcissistic parent may also anoint a child as the supposed best. And this serves the narcissistic parent's needs because this child affords the parent more admiration. The child's excellence in the parent's eyes reflects more on the parent than the child, at least in the parent's mind. So treating a child in this way reinforces the parent's fragile claim on their own superiority. Well, this can be very confusing for the child anointed in this manner. Nothing they can do is seemingly wrong in this parent's eyes, yet the parent may find everything wrong with other people in their orbit. So the child knows that they are not perfect and one may wonder what the parent would do if they knew this. The child may feel celebrated, but still invisible to the narcissistic parent. Well, let's look at another example of this. Jessica was always her mother's favorite. Jessica would accompany her mother on shopping trips where her mother would try on different clothes and ask for Jessica's opinion. Her mother would turn to Jessica for validation after yelling at her scapegoat brother or Jessica's father. And Jessica felt very special to her mother. As Jessica grew older, however, she began to feel like she was leading a double life. Her friends at school and Jessica herself started cursing and being interested in boys. But Jessica feared that her mother would disown her if she knew about this side of her. All that seemed visible to her mother was Jessica's supposed perfection. Jessica's fallibility went invisible, and so did her sense of being a real person to her mother. The third way a parent can make a child feel invisible is throwing you under the bus. A narcissistic parent may also only see negative qualities in a child. And this serves the parent's needs by getting to feel superior by virtue of being unlike this child. So the parent relocates their own sense of worthlessness into this child and then influences the child to identify with those feelings. In order for this to work, the parent and child have to consciously believe that there's nothing good about the child. This, of course, feels terrible for the child put into this role of scapegoat. They also feel invisible because it is an artificiality. The parts of them that are good, which may be substantial, cannot exist to this parent. The scapegoat child is left confused how nothing about them seems to please their parent. They're left feeling like only their badness is visible to the parent. Their goodness feels both invisible to the narcissistic parent and to the scapegoat child themselves. Let's look at an example to illustrate this. John was Jessica's older brother. He got the opposite treatment from their narcissistic mother. The mother was always harping on John about something. He hadn't cleaned his room like she asked. He was slouching. He was chewing too loudly, or he was mumbling. At every turn, she found fault in how he conducted himself. Seeing her treat his sister so well told John that his mother had the capacity to be kind, but she just didn't see him as worthy of her kindness. At school, John was well liked by his peers, a good athlete in sports, and got pretty good grades. And these facts about him seemed meaningless to his mother. It was as if his good qualities were invisible to her. This made John question the values of these qualities too. I mean, if his own mother did not think they mattered, then why should he? He grew to see himself as worthless in the way she was influencing him to. How children survive by living narrowly. Children are highly motivated to avoid the experience of being invisible. The cost of going unseen by their parent can feel like being nobody to no one. And this is an agonizing experience that we must all avoid it at all costs. So if it can't be avoided, then the effects of it must be numbed. Having to be who you are not. One way the child of a narcissistic parent may avoid or manage feeling invisible is to constrict themselves to be who the parent sees. Let's go back to the example of Jessica. She grew to see herself as perfect or having to be perfect in the same way her mother saw her. As a result, her human fallibility felt like an unpardonable sin. If she got anything but an A on a school assignment, she would wrench herself inside. She'd feel a torrent of self-loathing and even want to inflict pain on herself. She never shared these feelings with anyone. She was too ashamed to admit how she didn't fit into her mother's view of her. John had a different problem. He could not see anything good about being who he was. He was only visible to his mother when he was messing up, in need of correction, or a source of her irritation. His victories, attributes, and decency had no place in how she knew him. He found himself always finding a problem with everything he did. A good grade was a fluke. Friendly receptions were evidence that those people didn't really know him. And he tended to gravitate towards friends and partners who saw him the same way he was seen in his home. Well, Jessica and John had to constrict themselves in similar ways and with grave costs. Living this way still spared them the far worse experience of going unknown to their narcissistic parent. Having to be a ghost. Well, the child who goes ignored may constrict their awareness of themselves entirely. To be aware of themselves is to know and feel a tormenting problem with no solution, that they are not somebody to their parent. In order to cope, they must be a ghost to themselves. And the child can feel invisible even when in the direct presence of the narcissistic parent. They may not be spoken to or acknowledged in any way, but if the child takes offense to how little they seem to matter to this parent, they're only going to suffer more. The narcissistic parent may humiliate the child for not being self-sufficient or lash out at the child for not reflecting back that the parent is perfect. Under such conditions, the only way to survive can be to constrict the child's awareness of themselves. The child may go off in their mind to be occupied with anything but the painful reality in front of them. They may push themselves out of their minds and seek to be the ghost that they are actually being treated as by their narcissistic parent. Sandhya, to go back to her example, conditioned herself to make do with her father's inability to care about her existence. She did not make demands on him. She did whatever she could to avoid irritating him. This often meant being very careful to be quiet in the home and to clean up after herself, even as a very young child. Otherwise, her father's ignorance of her would be interrupted by his gruff, angry scolding for being so messy. It was one of the few times he would react to her directly, and it hurt severely. Over time, she found that living hurt a lot less when she focused on anyone and anything other than herself. Relationships where you are visible. The process of healing from being invisible to a narcissistic parent may not be surprising. Survivors need to find and participate in relationships where they are readily visible. Of course, this can be easier said than done. If you survived a childhood of feeling invisible, you may not know anything different. Worse, you may be conditioned to avoid visibility to others given how bad it has felt in the past. And this is why the process of healing can be at times a longer one. The survivor is working to recover a loving and respectful relationship with all of who they are. And to do this, they must stay in connection with the parts of themselves that were invisible to their parent. This means incrementally tolerating the shame, self-loathing, and despair that used to go along with being visible. In order for this exercise to be productive, the survivor has to do it in the context of a new, safe relationship. Reinforcement from another person is needed for the survivor's attempts to be visible. And it can be hard to find such safe relationships initially. As I described earlier, the expectation for invisibility can lead one to find relationships that go along with this. If you are wary of your current ability to find safe relationships, then a good option can be psychotherapy. In therapy, it can be one place where you have very high odds of finding a safe relationship. And this lets the survivor, in essence, control for the variable of whether the other person is safe. Now, if the survivor of invisibility doesn't feel safe or visible, there's a chance to explore what is happening. And of course, the therapist may have actually done, said, or not done something that led to the client's experience of invisibility. Most therapists can earnestly and non-defensively explore this possibility with you. Alternatively, the survivor's feelings of danger may be holdovers from what being visible used to mean. In these cases, the survivor gets to feel understood by someone else for what they used to have to endure privately. They can talk about how and what is making them feel endangered or invisible in that moment. And as they are met with implicit compassion and validation from the therapist, the experience of danger can lessen. So over time, sometimes significant amounts of time, the survivor may find it appealing to be visible. The post-traumatic consequences of being invisible to their narcissistic parent may subside. Now they can welcome the opportunity to see themselves fully and be seen by certain others fully. Well, let's illustrate this going back to Sandhya. She came to therapy in her mid-20s because she felt like she was just going through the motions in her life. She fell into states of depression on the weekends when she wasn't working. She described feeling like a stranger to herself and unable to find meaning on her own. Well, she and her therapist would work together for several years. During this time, her therapist understood how inconsequential she felt in relationship to her father. Her therapist would highlight to her how she operated from this assumption currently in her life. Her therapist would also show her that she mattered to him as a client. So Sandhya found insight into the way her father's self-absorption impacted her as a child and adolescent. And she also received current information in the therapeutic relationship that contradicted her conclusion that she did not matter to others in her life. These two factors worked in tandem over the years to restore Sandhya's sense of her own visibility to others and eventually to herself. Well, if you survived the experience of being invisible to a narcissistic parent, I hope you found today's video useful. And with that, I want to thank everyone again for your continued support, participation in and engagement with this channel and the resources that surround it. And I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.